Hi, Amy. Thanks for putting this together. This looks beautiful, this version here with the side image. Though there's some inefficiencies in the coding that could be done better. And while it looks great here, the problems are pronounced when you start to, try to vary it to make a mobile menu. If you want to add interaction, it's going to be a lot more complicated. So let's take a look at how they can be improved. And actually, furthermore, the problems with the coding here are actually the same problems you have on your progress menu. And fundamentally, there's a failure of association of elements. So, the way you have this structured right now is that, let's get our inspector out, is that you have a vertical line here that's a separate div. You have an image which is positioned absolutely along the side of the menu system. And then there is some text which is using a center tag, okay, here. And the problem is that the problem with the way that this is structured is that the elements are not associated with each other. And you can see some of the issues you can tell are, for example, that the alignment isn't perfect here with the center tag. It's not in alignment with the image. This vertical line here is, there's a little gap. It's not the margin. There's a little bit of extra margin on top than on the bottom. You get little bits of funniness. And then in terms of the way it interacts with the way you might want to make it interactive, there's no association between this text and the link that it refers to. Now, let's say we want to change this, and we want to make this interactive so that when you hover over the different links, the image changes. So first thing, let's get rid of some of this deprecated code here. So a center tag, this is like ancient code. We don't want to use this. This is like putting us in a time warp back to 1990. There are only very few special situations, like maybe in HTML email, you might use that on occasion because the HTML email is so primitive. There might be occasions to use a center tag. But generally speaking, on websites, this you definitely don't want that. Okay. The other thing is that a B tag is also deprecated because it's just like using an inline style. The B is an inline style because it's just giving it a specific indication of what it's supposed to look like. And CSS is never supposed to be that, or actually what I should say is HTML is supposed to describe the content. It's never supposed to be, you don't want to put like inline styling inside CSS. So you want to say, if you want to say something is more important, you make it strong. And a strong could be semi-bold, maybe it's a color change, maybe it's a weight, maybe it's a heavy weight, maybe it's a weight change and a color change, maybe it's a weight change and it's italicized. So strong is more semantic. It describes the text as being important rather than as simply being changing the color of it. Okay, and the vertical line, we don't want to use a vertical line here. Instead, what you want to use is a margin. But the first thing I'm going to do is let's use some modern markup here. I'm going to say figure here. Figure, we'll close this, and then we'll use, instead of this, we'll call this fig caption. Okay, so now the first thing that we've done here is that we've associated, we'll take off this class. We don't want this class here. We actually don't need the class anymore because it's inside a figure, which is more descriptive element. Okay. And okay, so we have this, and now the next step that we want to do is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, because I want this to be associated with this text here, I'm going to move it over into that section. Okay, and I'm going to keep this a link rather than make it. And for now, I'm going to put this here, but I'm going to hide it. Let's see. Okay. Now let's get rid of this vertical line. Okay, so just it has a color of gray. Yeah, it's all absolutely positioned. So absolutely, you're overall relying on absolute positioning, because what happens like if I add another menu item? Okay, then this just positions down. So absolute positioning is something you want to use very rarely. It is something that you use on occasion, but you're overusing it. So we don't want to use, you want to make all your code should be flexible. So when you add a new link, everything should adjust. So let's see what structures we have here. So here's the drop-down menu. So what we're going to need is we're going to need a wrapper around. Let's see if I use the traditional. This is how Bootstrap indicates it in the current example. It doesn't actually show a nested list, but let's use a traditional nested list. See what this does. So let's see, do we have any weird surprises? Oh, well, it added little bullets, but that's it. So we need to fix that. And we'll say padding 0. Okay. Now I just want to put an outline around it to see actually I could just say border. You know, I want to put. I'm just going to start with putting a border around it so I can see how the HTML is interpreting it. Okay. Okay, so I can see from my border, it looks like I have a double line at the bottom. What's happening there? Ah, I didn't close it. Okay, I didn't use the correct tag there. There we go, that's better. So this is, I can see how it's being contained. Now let's say we try, instead we say width 50%. Okay. Now, okay, so that's looking good. So instead of saying border here, I'm going to say border right solid 1 pixel, and you had gray. I tend to, it's usually good to not use the verbose CSS colors, except, for white and black. It's okay, but it's just not specific enough. Let's try for there we go. Let's see, so that's on the menu. Let's add a top of 0, and then on the sides, let's say 10 pixels. Let's see what that does. Nope, did not have the desired effect. So instead, let's adjust the links. And I can see what happens when I hover over it. Aha! So it has a fixed width, 95. So let's go back. I think that I saw that was in this here. So you want to avoid hard coding. So you want to avoid hard coding widths and things like this. You want to have a more flexible system. And you wouldn't want to apply the width on the hover, because what that could create is jumping. It could make like jumping around. It could, because if the width was different without the hover, and then you add this width, you'll get weird behaviors. So if you were going to add a width, it would be added like this, not specifically on the hover state. Let's try 95%. And also using a percentage is then going to make it a lot easier to adjust when you want to add a media query. Is that going to work? Let's try it out. It does work. Okay, so now we have this behavior here. Okay, let's take off, figure out what's happening at the top here. Oh, we have this class CCC. We'll just give it the regular dropdown. Okay. Now the next step that we want to do is we want to show the image on the side. So now this is where we are actually going to use absolute positioning in this case, but within the context of an associated element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this figure I'm going to put it inside this list item. Okay. And so let's just add some more code to this. Well, we use 95. Yeah, let's do 95% because that's what we use for the other side for the text. There we go. Let's see what happens if I say we're gonna now if we put a position absolute on the figure, what will happen? So if you recall that okay, if you recall when you apply let's say a height, like let's say you use relative positioning and you use top and use left, it's relative to the previous element that also has a position of either relative or fixed or absolute. So if it doesn't have any position applied by default, which is the default, it has a position of static, then it will be ignored. So if I say, for example, let's say we said position absolute, and then we say right negative 100%, say width with 50%. Okay, interesting. So what is this relative? So the question is, what is this being positioned absolute in relation to? So it's existing, the parent is Li, right? So if the Li has a position of absolute, of relative, oops, spelled it wrong. It's going to be relative to that element. Here we go. Now the question is, why is this the width here? If this is this is one of the tricky things when you use percentages is like what are things, what are things in relation to is always the question. Oh, so I think this looks like this is the problem child here. Let's set this back to 100. Let's try it. Yeah, 100 should be fine. Let's do it that way instead. So on the figure, we'll add text align center. Okay, and let's make this image a bit smaller. Okay. And let's set the top to 0. Okay, and then we can add for the fig caption, okay, let's say oh, that's a little too much. So now we have markup where we have clearer associations between the elements. Let me change this. There we go. where there's a clearer association between the elements, which is going to make it easier to adjust and animate them as needed.